Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's going on? James Coe here with you. It is Friday. Yesterday, we hit on a bunch of sleepers at the quarterback and running back position. Today, we are going to hit up wide receivers and fantasy tight ends. We're going to start at the wide receiver position. We'll talk about a couple of my favorite guys here. We'll start with Jauan Jennings. San Francisco taking on Tampa Bay this week. Jauan Jennings returning from his hip injury. And he does have a chance to put up a big number again, like we saw earlier in the season as well. Tampa has been, they've been gashed by numerous receivers. Overall, they've given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers in general. I say in general, why? Because Jauan Jennings obviously moves around. He plays about 50% outside, about 50% inside. So, splitting up the outside-inside numbers doesn't really make sense. But overall, Tampa Bay's been getting gashed by dang near everybody at the wide receiver spot. So he's in a good spot regardless. Let me say this. Over his career, in the 6 games that Jennings has played, at least 70% of the snaps, he has averaged a very husky 14.74 PPR points per game. And I understand that number is being driven heavily by the huge game he had earlier this season. But again, it's a little ridiculous to also take that off of his menu, considering, again, he has done it. He's been in this system for a long time. He knows Brock Purdy. He's built up that chemistry with Brock Purdy now. And I think Brock Purdy will look for him to, again, advance the chain, move the first down, all those kind of things. Now, I do prefer Jennings, I would say a good amount more than Ricky Pearsall. Now, I would be remiss, though, in not mentioning Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall is absolutely a deep sleeper as well for all the reasons we lined out against Tampa Bay. The only thing for me is Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings are not necessarily going to be hitting at the exact same time, right? So, again, that's you kind of have to pick your poison here. You kind of have to pick your guy. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Pearsall? Is it going to be Jauan Jennings? We got to go and find out here. All right, so we're going to move on, and let's talk about Xavier Gipson taking on Arizona. If there is a deep sleeper that I am more, you're not going to find somebody that I'm more excited about at the deep sleeper position than Xavier Gipson. I am juiced. I'm jacked. I am so excited to see Xavier Gipson get a chance because this dude can play. All right, this guy can absolutely play. And it's just the fact that he's been buried on the depth chart, right? They go and sign Alan Lazard because Lazard's played with Rodgers, and okay, we're going to have Lazard in there. All right, fine. They're going to go sign Mike Williams. Okay, all right. They're going to go trade for Davante Adams. Oh, by the way, they go draft a guy in Malachi Corley. So, yeah, Xavier Gipson has absolutely been buried on the depth chart, and for good reason. These guys are all good players. But I think Xavier Gipson can play. And again, he's been buried on the depth chart. That is not an issue now. Alan Lazard is on IR. They trade away Mike Williams. When you take a look at what it's going to look like for a 3 wide receiver set, who's it going to be? It's going to be Garrett Wilson, Davante Adams, who's going to be the 3rd. To me, I think it's going to be Xavier Gipson. Now, I know a lot more folks are probably a lot more excited about Malachi Corley here, right? But here's the thing. Corley has ran 2 routes all year long. 2. That's it, 2. Meanwhile, Gipson in comparison has run 64 routes on the season. I think Corley's more of a gimmicky gadget guy for them right now. And I think when they want to run an actual functional offense, and remember who the quarterback is, Aaron Rodgers not really into the gimmicky stuff, man. He's as old school as it comes. He's going to run that West Coast system. He needs to find guys that can get open quick. That's Xavier Gipson. Now, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but shoot, I see a lot of Randall Cobb in Xavier Gipson. I do. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Maybe I'm steaming this guy up too much, man. I don't know. But, again, I'm excited to see Xavier Gipson hit the football field. I'm excited to see him get an opportunity. Go watch it and go let this be Malachi Corley and make me look like an idiot, man. I don't know. But here's the thing. The matchup, too, against Arizona, it's pretty good. right? Arizona's given up the 5th most fantasy points per game to receivers lined up in the slot. They're bottom 10 in receptions, yards, and touchdowns per game allowed to inside wide receivers. Gibson's got a good matchup on paper. I like the player, and now he's got a role. All right, we move on. Let's talk about John Mechie, another deep sleeper. There's a lot of deep sleepers here. I'm not going to lie to you. John Mechie, though, taking on Detroit. The matchup don't get no better than when we're talking about the Lions, as Detroit has given up the most fantasy points per game, the most fantasy points per game to receivers lined up in the slot, including the most receptions and the most yards. Mechie, he ran the 2nd most routes among Houston's wide receivers last week. And I think regardless of whether or not Nico Collins comes back, first of all, actually, to be honest with you, if I am rostering John Mechie, and I know there's not a lot of you out there, but if you're desperate, you need John Mechie, 4 teams on a bye. Okay. I actually prefer Nico Collins to come back because he's going to drag away a lot of defenders. And if Detroit gets after the football here, and remember, they did bring in Zadarius Smith to add to that pass rush, and Houston has obviously had problems protecting C.J. Stroud, as he is the most pressured quarterback in the NFL. Well, they need answers to this. They need solutions. And a lot of the solutions have to be quicker routes. Listen, Bobby Slowick, I think, has done a good job, but I think what we can say is that there's not a lot of quick game in Bobby Slowick's offense. Nico Collins, it takes a while for him to develop in his routes. I'm not saying him in particular. I'm just saying the route combinations that he's being asked to run, it just takes longer. Same thing with Tank Dell, right? So John Mechie could be an answer underneath. I think it also might be Dalton Schultz, who I really like this week against Detroit as well. But again, if they ask Schultz to stay in and protect because C.J. Stroud is so under fire, John Mechie could have one of these, PPR scam games, right? Like 7 targets, 5 grabs for 50. If he gives you 10, you're not going to be mad about that, man. All right, let's talk about another slot receiver, deep sleeper here in Parker Washington. He's taken on Minnesota. And the Vikings have given up the 2nd most receptions and the 3rd most yards. They're tied for the 3rd most touchdowns allowed per game to inside wide receivers. So while we like the aggressive nature of Minnesota's defense, Brian Flores obviously has these guys humming. I would also say, because of their style, it's very much a high risk, high reward proposition when we're talking about Minnesota's defense. I've been saying that all year long, right? The box score did not show it, but I did think Parker Washington actually played pretty well last week. He was second only to Brian Thomas Jr. in routes run, and he ended up with a below average, but an okay 6 target, 3 grab, 41 yard slash line. So 7.1, that's not moving the needle in PPR very much at all. But shoot, I mean, add a reception. Now we're talking about potentially 10 points here. It's really not going to take that much. He's in a great spot again against Minnesota. I will say this too. He played primarily as an outside wide receiver last week with both Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis out. But if Gabe Davis is back with that shoulder injury and he has practiced in a limited capacity on both Wednesday and Thursday, then obviously Washington would slide back inside. But here's the thing, guys. Even if Davis doesn't come back, and even if Parker Washington is forced to play outside wide receiver, that's okay. I actually was, I don't want to say encouraged, but I thought he can hang out there. He doesn't look overwhelmed. It's not a good pass catching group, and it might be Mac Jones and shoot, man. You're probably wondering, well, who the heck was their slot receiver? I had to look this up. I was like, who is this dude that is out there right now? I believe it's a fella by the name of Andre Trammell. I'm gonna look this up now because it's Austin Trammell. Austin Trammell had never played a snap for Jacksonville until week number 9, and then he played 32 snaps somehow, some way. Got 3 targets, 2 grabs for 40. Go figure. But again, yeah, we might be going a little too deep. We're talking about Austin Trammell as a deep sleeper. Parker Washington's about as far as I'll go here, all right? But either way, it's a good matchup outside or inside, either way, because Minnesota's just been giving up a lot of production to wide receivers in general. So, yeah, Austin Trammell. Watch Austin Trammell go out there and score a touchdown, man. That's just going to be crazy. Anyways, there you go. Not a deep sleeper, regular sleeper. We're talking about Xavier Legette, or Legs, as I'm calling him, or what's his cowboy nickname? He's got some cowboy nickname out there. Dollar Bill, I think, is the nickname for Xavier Legette. Oh, I love this guy. I love Xavier Legette. I like rooting for him. I like watching him play. He could do a couple different things, man. He's great. The matchup's good too. The Giants have given up the 10th most fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers this year. And over the last 5 weeks, get this, over the last 5 weeks, the Giants have given up a double-digit PPR performance to 8 different wide receivers. That's pretty good. That is pretty good. I think Xavier Legette has a really good chance to crack 12 or more fantasy points for you this week. By the way, Legette is a certified touchdown maker, man. He has a touchdown in 4 of his last 6 games. All right, let's talk about tight ends now. Theo Johnson against the aforementioned Carolina Panthers. The Panthers, as we know, their defense is not good. Carolina allows the second most fantasy points per game to the tight end spot. And good Lord, man, Theo Johnson has just been playing a lot of snaps. Over the last 4 weeks, he has absolutely dominated snap share. He's playing about 90% of the snaps over the last 4 weeks. And you're probably wondering, is that a lot? Yes, that is an unbelievable amount, right? Most starting tight ends are somewhere, they're in that 65 to 75 range. Most tight ends, most starting tight ends, even star tight ends are around 80%. Travis Kelce, for example, has eclipsed 80% snap share just one time in his last 4 games. So again, 65 to 75% for most starting tight ends, and star receivers probably somewhere between 70 to 80%. So to see Theo Johnson play 90% of the snaps, good God, he's going to have a lot of opportunity to go and make some plays. He's hyper athletic as well. Big guy. He can move. When you watch him move, you would not think this guy's 255 pounds or whatever he is, man. It's crazy. And he did have his best game as a pro last week, posting a 6-target, 3-grab, 51 yards slash line with a touchdown, 14.1 PPR points. Theo Johnson widely available on the waiver wire right now if you are in a pinch at tight end. He did set a season high in targets and yards last week while also scoring his first touchdown of his career. A player that I think I would trust more, though, might be Taysom Hill, taking on Atlanta. All the same reasons we liked him last week, we like him again this week. He's not going to be as widely available as Theo Johnson, which is why I led with Theo Johnson there. But Taysom Hill does have a chance, I think, to put up another good number. The matchup isn't as good as it was last week against Carolina, but again, all the same reasons we liked Taysom last week, we like him this week. New Orleans is down a bunch of receivers. They're down a bunch of running backs. And Taysom Hill is still, even at his age, one of the best athletes that they've got on this football team. And shoot, man, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe he throws a couple of passes too. So there's a couple of different ways that he can sting Atlanta. And I think Taysom's going to see a lot of work. And he will be highly utilized. And that's what you want for Taysom Hill. You know, the difference with Taysom Hill this year, or in this stretch versus in years past, is I think his floor is so much higher than it was, again, in seasons past. In seasons past, his floor was literally 0, right? You just never felt comfortable risking that, even though he could post a, ridiculous 20-point ceiling, or hell, even like a 25, 30-point ceiling, right? But you just never felt comfortable throwing Taysom Hill in there because he could give you a 0 spot. I feel like his floor now is significantly higher because they just have to lean on him. I feel like his floor is like somewhere in that like 5 to 7 range. And let's be real, at tight end, that is an awesome floor. So he's probably my favorite sleeper tight end this week again and moving forward. I would not be surprised to see him finish as a top 12 tight end in fantasy this year. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Cole Kmet taking on New England. I'm going to be 100% real with you. I don't have a lot of fancy numbers to back this up. Okay. The paper matchup is just, it's blah. It's whatever. The Patriots allow about league average when it comes to fantasy points per game to tight end. But I'm just going to say, man, it's, you know what, dude? He is due. My guy, Cole Kmet, is so due for a game here. He posted a literal 0 spot last week. A 0 spot. And dude, 2 weeks ago, it wasn't that much better. 1 catch for 14 yards, bro. Come on, dude. He's got 1 catch over his last 2 games. This guy's too talented of a player to not be more involved. I think that changes this week. I do think that Cole Kmet gets activated, and shoot, man, I don't know why, but I'm just feeling a touchdown to Cole Kmet this week. So I don't know how big of a game he's going to have, but I'm going to go ahead and just put a little cashish down on a Cole Kmet anytime touchdown because I know I'm getting good odds. All right, let me just say that. So again, I don't got fancy numbers, bro, but I'm the sleeper king for a reason because I can put my neck out on a line for a guy like Cole Kmet, who is a good player. All right, he's a good player. He's taking on New England, and New England's defense is pretty good, but I think it's more average. Go let Cole Kmet cook, baby. Let's go. All right, final one here for you. Jonnu Smith taking on the LA Rams. The Rams allow the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight end, so I do got fancy numbers here for you in regards to Jonnu Smith, all right? And this game, too, does have a relatively large point total. I believe it's the 3rd highest point total of the weekend. That, to me, suggests a lot of touchdown exposure. And you want touchdown exposure when you're talking about fantasy tight ends because you know they're not going to generally get there with overall volume. Speaking of volume, though, okay, let's be real. Jonnu Smith has been surprisingly used as a highly utilized player in this Dolphins offense. He's seen at least 6 targets in 4 straight games. Now, he hasn't necessarily turned those 6 targets into very much at times, but he does have a 20-point game on the dock. Like, Jonnu Smith is being utilized in a way we have not seen tight ends be utilized in this offense before. So, Tua is back. It's against the Rams, whose defense is not good at all. It's a higher scoring game. Jonnu Smith, I think, to me, he has all the makings of finishing as a top 10 fantasy tight end this week. I don't know. We're going to find out. All right. So anyways, there you go. That's your, those are your sleepers for the wide receiver and tight end position. Go back if you want to listen to my quarterback and running back sleepers there as well. But we got to go. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about injuries, how it's impacting different fantasy teams and all those kind of things, how you should pivot off of injuries and do all of those things as well. Until then, remember, it's never too late to chase your dreams. Peace.